So I'm here today to recommend you some dark mermaid books. I got news for you. Mermaids are terrifying. Was I the only one who grew up in the early 90s rewatching The Little Mermaid? And when I saw the original Disney animated film, I wanted to be a mermaid. They were beautiful and it was all fantastical and pretty and exciting. And I got swept up in the magic. And then I grew up and started reading adult mermaid books and found out that these creatures were possibly monstrous and fierce and terrifying, and then I really wanted to be a mermaid. So if you are someone who just loves something that kind of spins together a fairy tale into something dark and twisted, if you're looking for a very adult version of The Little Mermaid, I've got some great recommendations for you here today. Hopefully this will be a fun video, hopefully you stick around, and let's get started. First, let's start with adult books, beginning with Into the Drowning Deep by Mira. And I'm sorry to longtime watchers of my channel, yes, this is possibly the most recommended book that I talk about. I have brought this book up in so many videos, but I love it a lot and I can't make a mermaid video without this one. So if you somehow don't know the premise, stick with me. This is a story that follows a group that go out to discover what happened to a different crew. So back in the prequel, which we'll get to in a moment, there was a crew that went out to film a mockumentary. They wanted to pretend that they were mermaids and film this jokey documentary. However, something went wrong when they went across to the Marianas Trench. They disappeared, and now there is a new crew that is sent out to try to find their wreckage or find out where they disappeared to. We follow different perspectives, but the main one is this woman who actually is a professor who has the belief that mermaids are possibly real, and they also have a sister who was on the original crew that went, so they have a personal reason to go on this mission. And then we meet the other crew members. They go out to sea to find out what happened, and well, spoiler alert, mermaids are possibly real. So first off, Mira is always known for bringing great diversity into her work in a natural way. So you have great representation for different sexual orientations. You have a deaf character, which is a form of diversity I don't see enough in stories. And that is kind of woven into the story as the characters and crew start to kind of get together. Some of them sleep together and all of that as they are headed towards the Marianas Trench and headed towards danger. This book is one that's great because it mashes together a sci-fi setup, the idea that, well, what if mermaids are real? What if there are creatures in the ocean that we just don't know exist? Which is a great premise because of the fact that the oceans are not fully explored at this time. And so there definitely is a possibility that certain things exist. The possibility that they're mermaids is perhaps questionable, but you go along with the story. And then within the story, it definitely turns into a fun creature horror, but a really smart one because, again, they play into the biology of the mermaids. They go into their psychology and study them as this group of amphibians, and they're also very dark because, don't get me wrong, this book comes across as sweet and innocent and fun, but it also gets really gruesome. The author goes there, the characters go there, people will die, and it's so much fun. I think it's just such an original take on mermaids, and also, again, just making fun of these mockumentaries, making fun of so many other media and fake news and all of that in such a fun package. Can I say fun enough? But I adore this book, highly recommend it. From then, I recommend to go back to the prequel, which is called Rolling in the Deep, also of course by Mira. And this is one that used to be harder to get a hold of, but it's now a lot easier. There's been some reprinting of it, so definitely check Hoopla if your library has that. And this is one that follows the original crew that went to film this mockumentary. So they go out, they don't think anything's real. They're not trying to find real mermaids. They are just trying to film a fake documentary and make some money. And of course, as we know, especially if you've already read the original novel, you know things are gonna go wrong and you know what is coming for them. I often get asked which book to read first, and in my opinion, I definitely think you should read the novel first and then the prequel. I think that the novel works best as its own piece, and then afterwards, of course, with the prequel, you know what's coming, but I think that it works well because the prequel is not meant to be a surprise. Instead, it's fun to get to find out the backstory of what happened afterwards, and I think that the order of that works perfectly fine. So read it the way that you watch Star Wars, where you read the larger book and then go back to the prequels after, although Star Wars might be a bad recommendation comparison there. Anyway, I highly recommend recommend this one. I do think it's worth your time. I don't read a lot of like add-on companion stories, but this is one where I cannot get enough of this world, and I think that the prequel is well worth your time. Next, let's talk about The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw. And this is one that is, again, very short given its length, but we follow a mermaid who follows along the classic narrative where they go to land, they meet the prince, and they supposedly live happily ever after. However, this story starts after that. In the case, this mermaid is a ferocious beast and has eaten people and is now going on the run with this doctor character, and the story goes from there. This book is highly lyrical. It's very much about the prose and is told in a way that's perhaps a little bit more unconventional. So if you're looking for just a very simple story told in a simple way, I don't think you'll get that there. But I do think that this author has really uplifted their works in some of their earlier works that I've read. And in terms of the story, it's beautiful in a gross way. It's horrifying in a way that's lovely. It's such a weird smashing of the fact that mermaids are meant to be these beautiful beasts, but still monsters. And this book really comes to terms with this. This is the book I particularly recommend for those of you that have watched The Little Mermaid and are looking for kind of the adult, real life version of what's happening. Don't get me wrong, mermaids aren't real, but this book definitely grounds in reality the nastiness that the Disney movies kind of, shove away to the side and kind of make us forget the brutality of the original folktales. So highly recommend this one. It's smart, it's fierce, it's very different, and it's a quick read, so you can fly through it. Next, let's talk about The Deep by River Solomon. And this is another novella. This one follows a group of mermaids where we follow one individual that is responsible to remember what has happened in their past. This is set in a world where these mermaids are of Black descent, so it pulls from real life history where the Black slaves were taken over the ocean, and if they were sick or caused trouble, they were pushed over the side, assumingly to drown. However, in this reimagining of this fantastical version, it imagines what would happen if they were able to survive by turning into mermaids and surviving that way. So there is this horrible, brutal past that is the backstory for these mermaids. And in order to have a happy life, they have mostly forgotten that past and just hold it in the memories of certain individuals that have to carry that heavy burden. This book I always describe as a Little Mermaid version of The Giver, but it's very much his own work. It's very powerful, but as you can imagine with that setup, it's also a very heavy book. It's a book that isn't a fun time. It's not entertaining. It's not laugh out loud. You're not going to get that with this book, but instead it's a very powerful message that I think everyone should read at least once. I think it's so important and a great book to read during Black History Month or any time of year. The author teamed up with some rap artists and they did this collaboration. So the prose in this book is beautiful. There's a rhythm to it. I personally recommend, if you're open to doing audiobooks, that this is a great one to do on that audio form, because again, it has that rhythm that you might not notice if you're just reading the words on the page. And so I highly recommend this one. It is just innovative and dark and memorable, and again, the kind of story that will stick with you. And there is an afterword that goes into the history of the book and explains it in a lot more detail than I'm doing here, so I highly recommend do your research. And again, as a heavy story, this is not one of the fun books in this list, but absolutely worth your time. Such an important story. Next, let's talk about Chlorine by Jade. And this is a piece of literary horror or a coming-of-age story. We follow a young woman who is in a team of competitive swimmers. You find out that they are of mixed descent. Their family immigrated over from China, and they are trying to balance the complications of their family's expectations with meeting new girls. There is sapphic romance, so there's potential romantic feelings between some of these girls, and you also have the fierce competition of trying to be the best within the water. Now, where the mermaid aspect comes in is the fact that this young woman is obsessed with mermaids, and in a way that is perhaps a little bit more literary at the beginning. She feels herself could be or is a mermaid or wants to become a mermaid, and so you see that within the story. They are infatuated by this beast. They glorify them for their ease of going through the water, and they seek that out within the story. This is one that is slower paced. Again, it's a coming of age story, so it has those contemporary elements. The characters character trying to navigate through life. There's definitely dark moments, interpersonal relationships and conflicts all throughout the story, but read all the way through the end because it definitely ramps up, and that's where it moves into more of the horror piece. It's unconventional, it's unsettling, it's dark, it's messed up, it's weird, all the things that I love so much in these kind of books. This is one of my favorite books, and I highly recommend it. Again, it's a little bit different. You're not just going to have mermaids dancing all over the place in the book. Instead, it's more of a thoughtful way that is woven into the story, and when it gets there, and it's so well done. It's not cheesy, it's not campy, it's smart and tight and twisted, and I love it. Then I want to talk about Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the first book in a epic fantasy series that inspired by pre-Columbian indigenous groups. So in the story, we follow a couple different perspectives. One is this young man who has been forced by his parents to take on a role. He is believed to be a chosen one and is going off because there is this celestial event that is about to happen. In order to get there, he has to go and cross an ocean, and so that's where we get the second perspective, where we get this woman who is a woman but possibly also a siren. We find that very quickly, that they have powers over the sea. And so within the story, the two characters eventually interconnect and get in the same area and are moving along the ocean, and that is where you get to see their influence, their power, the fact that they are seen as very otherly and judged for their gift, and how that is woven into the story. This one is, of course, a siren story, not a mermaid story, but again, I don't know what it is. It's just the fact that I find every reviewer, it's not just me, who will smash these two subgenres together. They're kind of too small to talk about on their own, and definitely they're interconnected in that way. So this one is more about the call and her voice, and she doesn't necessarily have flipper fins popping around the water, and I think it's so well woven into the story. It has that great seafaring aspect that I love so much. The characters are rich, the story is rich, the world building is imaginative, and I love that it's not spoon-fed to you. Instead, you have to figure it out slowly as you go along, which is my favorite way to experience fantasy stories. So highly recommend this one. Mermaids, or sirens rather, are a part of the story, but there's so much more to it that even if you aren't a mermaid reader, this is one you just want to check out. Now, I do consider myself to be predominantly an adult fiction reader and reviewer on this channel, but in order to complete this video, I fully acknowledge that either I had to recommend adult fiction books that I don't actually like or wouldn't normally recommend, or I had to include some young adult books. And for whatever reason, mermaids just tend to be a topic that is much more highly available in the YA sphere, so I'm going to recommend a few that I felt worked for me as someone who normally prefers adult fiction. The first one is actually a classic, and that is this story of The Little Mermaid, which is basically a short story length, original done by Hans Christian Andersen. So if you have not read it, if you're only familiar with the Disney-fied version, you must go back to the original content. It is dark, and I would actually just say it's very grim and depressing are the two words I want to use to describe this story. The image of sea foam in the story is one that has stuck in my head since I first read it as a child, and then I reread it recently for the purpose of this video. But my goodness, it is dark, it is messed up, and you really get to see that as dark as Disney stories can get, because some of them do get darker, the original source material is so much darker, so much worse, and it's really worth seeing the original story. Now, before continuing on, I do need to mention that a few of the stories I'm going to mention don't technically advertise that they are mermaid stories. So if you consider that to be a spoiler to hear about a story that has a mermaid that is not included in the synopsis of the book, then you may want to step away, but I'm going to continue on. The next one I want to recommend is Don't Hold Back the Tide by Melinda Salisbury. And this is a young adult book that follows a woman. It is set in Scotland, and she is a young woman or a teenager who is living with her father. And you find out right at the beginning of the story, so it's not a spoiler here, that she believes that her father killed her mother. She remembers the night where something happened. She remembers the scene. She wasn't there, but she heard it all. And when she woke up, her mother was dead, and her father never talked about it again. And so she still lives with her father. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know who to tell. And so every day she just goes through the motions knowing that her father is a killer. They go out to sea. They have certain things that they do every day. And I do feel that while there is a mermaid aspect to this story, I don't really want to give away more than that, because I do think it's fun to try to figure out where that creature aspect comes in. Basically, there is something else going on. The story is more complicated, and it's such a delight to read and recommend. Again, it is kind of fun going into it completely spoiler free, but then I couldn't talk about it in this video, which makes it kind of hard to figure out. So bear with me. I do try to stay on the side of giving less spoilers and being very mindful of that when I do videos. But again, if you're going to do a video talking about mermaids and sea creatures, sometimes you have to kind of bend the rules and put out some content that's going to let people know if they're looking for these kind of books. Next is To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo, and this is another young adult book. In the story, it's a piece of epic fantasy that is set under the ocean or around the ocean, which is something that I think is just really unique. And so basically you follow those on two warring factions. There are the mermaids and there are the sirens, and they are at war. This is a young adult book, so this is one that I need to give perhaps a warning to, if that's the right word, that there is going to be some potential romance within the story. You kind of have cross lovers where you have someone who is interested in someone on the other side. Kind of hits on the classic tropes of the genre. Not my favorite, but I do think that the premise was so unique. I love the idea of underwater fantasy, which is not something you see a lot, even in a list of mermaid books. So this one did hold my attention, that I was able to look the other way and kind of ignore the romance that I didn't care about and just enjoy the epic version. I do know it's part of a longer series or a trilogy, I believe, but I didn't actually continue. But again, if you like this kind of thing, if you're open to YA stories, I do think this is one of the better ones. Next is Daughter of a Pirate King, which, like the title suggests, follows the daughter of a pirate king who allows himself to get kidnapped or taken hostage on this ship. You find out very early on that they intentionally do this because they are on a mission sent by their father. They are tasked with getting something back for them. You find out that this is not a damsel in distress. Instead, she has been highly trained in the ways of being a pirate. And this is just a really fun pirate romp that has some fantastical elements, which is how it ties in with this subgenre here. But those elements are kind of revealed later in the story, so I'll let you figure out those yourself. But what transpires is just, again, a really fun story because you have this young woman who, again, is pretending to be very weak and mild, but soon enough gets to show the fact that she's very smart. And there's also a bit of a love interest, which again, normally is not my thing within a YA story. But this one definitely leans towards a little bit of PG action where you have the characters getting a little bit steamy. And I did actually get into that, so I found that the back and forth was great just because you have characters that are on kind of different sides with different objectives and you don't necessarily know who to trust. There is at least one more book out by this point, which is really fun, highly recommend it, and that one also has more elements of the sea creature angle that you'll get to see more of, but it's one that I picked up on a lark. I had no idea what I was getting myself into and had so much fun reading it. Like, I was addicted. I did not want to read anything else until this was done, and I just think it's the kind of book that is so much fun. If you're ever in a reading slump, this would be a great one to pick up. So that is it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And please recommend me your favorite mermaid slash siren slash sea creature story that I possibly have not read yet and would definitely love to check out, because I really enjoy this subgenre and it's kind of hard to find books in it. It's a little bit niche, but when you do find a hidden gem, it's so much fun and so enjoyable. If you're new to my channel, I do read more than mermaid books, so if you want to stick around, subscribe. I read horror, thriller, science fiction, and fantasy and other dark things. And if you want to help me out with this video, you can give me a thumbs up. You can drop an emoji. I think a mermaid would be an appropriate one. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.